Ever wondered how Nintendo got to be one of the biggest gaming companies in the world? Well, you're in the right place. In this video, we're going all the way back to take a look at Nintendo's humble beginnings and how the consoles evolved over the years. Let's dive in and be sure to tell us in the comments what Nintendo console is your favorite. 1980, Nintendo Game & Watch. Nintendo's first entry into its console lineup was the Game & Watch. The small handheld gaming device was created by game designer Gunpei Yokoi, who was inspired by a man he saw playing on a calculator while commuting one day. The design was simple. It featured a single game and a clock that displayed on an LCD screen. With around 60 unique Game & Watch handheld released, the product proved to be a major seller for Nintendo, with over 14 million units sold worldwide in its first year of release. In 1982, Nintendo would hit it big when they released the Game & Watch version of Donkey Kong. This was the first handheld port of the game and went on to sell over 8 million copies. It was clear from the start that Nintendo has a passion for handhelds, and the success of the Game & Watch likely encouraged them to go all in on handhelds in the future. 1983, Nintendo Entertainment System, NES. The NES hardly needs any introduction among veteran gamers. The NES brought 8-bit gaming into the living rooms of over 60 million people upon release. It was easily the best-selling console of the generation and was even credited as the reason North America was able to recover from the video game crash of 1983. Originally marketed as the Family Computer or Famicom in Japan, it was marketed as the Nintendo Entertainment System once it hit shelves in the US. The launch titles for this thing were stacked and included classics like Super Mario Bros., Ice Climber, and Duck Hunt. Other classics like Metroid and The Legend of Zelda would go on to originate on the NES and go on to have extremely successful franchises for years to come. 1989, Game Boy. The Game Boy was revolutionary for handheld gaming and is widely regarded as one of the greatest consoles of all time. Designed by the same team behind the widely successful Game & Watch, the Game Boy was the first handheld to feature swappable cartridges. This was a welcome feature, and the handheld would go on to sell millions of units worldwide. The release of Pokémon cemented the Game Boy in the Console Hall of Fame and prompted Nintendo to build on the design in a really interesting way. In 1998, Nintendo released the Game Boy Color, which added color to the mix and featured backward compatibility with all existing Game Boy games. This was a pretty big deal at the time, and the displays still hold up on well-maintained Game Boy Colors to this day. Nintendo would also release a wide range of different accessories for both the Game Boy and Game Boy Color, including printers, magnifying screens, and built-in lights. 1990, Super Nintendo Entertainment System. The SNES in 1990 was Nintendo's second addition to the console family, and a widely successful one at that. At the time of release, competition was stiff between the Sega Mega Drive, which was first released and was selling fairly well with equally impressive hardware. Ultimately, Nintendo's huge selection of high-quality games during this era helped to boost the SNES to the spot of the best-selling 16-bit console of all time. With games like Chrono Trigger, Link to the Past, and Super Mario World, the Mega Drive simply couldn't compete with the caliber of games being released on the SNES. The SNES introduced a region lock on the consoles, effectively making it so North American cartridges couldn't be played in the Japanese Super Famicom and vice versa. This was a strange addition, but one that didn't seem to bother people too much, as it would go on to sell over 50 million units worldwide. 1995, Virtual Boy. In 1995, Nintendo got weird and released the Virtual Boy, a virtual reality visor that allowed the user to play wireframe 3D games. The Virtual Boy was not well received by gamers, and many reported feeling sick after using it. To play the Virtual Boy, the visor and controller must first be planted on a flat surface, and the user must lean into the visor to play the game. This setup was not ideal, and one of the biggest complaints was that it was uncomfortable to play. After only a few months of shelf life, production on the Virtual Boy was cancelled. This was a tough lesson for Nintendo to learn and can be marked as one of the company's few real failures. 1996, Nintendo 64. From the ashes of the Virtual Boy fiasco, Nintendo rose up and released what is likely the greatest video game console of all time. Still clinging to the remnants of the cartridge era, Nintendo pulled off something truly amazing with the quality of games released for the N64. The 64-bit CPU housed inside the console provided more power than a cartridge-based console ever had before. Unfortunately, consoles like the Sony PlayStation and Sega Saturn were finding more success with disc-based consoles, which ultimately provided more power and better performance. Where the N64 really shined was in its lineup of games, with hits like Super Mario 64, Banjo-Kazooie, and Ocarina of Time. There is no doubt that Nintendo had the strongest lineup of games during this era. The Nintendo would only go on to sell 33 million units, but has gone down in history as a fan-favorite console. 2001, Nintendo GameCube. In 2001, Nintendo finally made the switch to disc-based consoles and released the Nintendo GameCube. The competition was even stiffer during this time period, as the PlayStation 2, Xbox, and Dreamcast were all hot with gamers and featured more powerful hardware. While the GameCube is a beloved console by many, at the time it was considered a failure by Nintendo. After selling only 22 million units, it seemed like big releases for the system like Super Mario Sunshine and Twilight Princess wouldn't be enough to match the success of the PS2. The failure of the GameCube is likely what motivated Nintendo to step away from consoles and focus on handheld gaming for the next few years. 2001, Game Boy Advance. While the GameCube did not meet Nintendo's expectations, the Game Boy Advance released the same year would leave them pleasantly surprised. The new system featured more powerful hardware, better graphics, and a wide range of color options for gamers to choose from. Towards the end of the life of the handheld, the Game Boy Advance SP would be released. This was a sleek and modern upgrade to the Game Boy Advance that many consider the forerunner to the Nintendo DS. Selling much better than the GameCube, with 81 million units sold worldwide, Nintendo would mark the Game Boy Advance as a success and move forward with their focus on handheld gaming. 2004, Nintendo DS. With the release of the Nintendo DS, Nintendo once again revolutionized handheld gaming forever. The new dual-screen setup and touchscreen design are reminiscent of the original Game & Watch, which is a nice callback to a classic system. With backward compatibility with GBA games and a huge selection of games, the Nintendo DS had no problem beating the Sony PSP in sales. Like Nintendo's other handhelds, the DS had several different versions released, including the DSi and DS Lite. It would go on to become one of the highest-selling handhelds of all time, selling just over 155 million units. If you're enjoying the video, please take a second to like and subscribe, maybe even hit the bell while you're at it. 2006, Wii. Nintendo's return to the world of home consoles was the Wii in 2006. Once again, the console seemed late to the party, as the PlayStation 3 and Xbox 360 were already dominating the console market. The Wii's claim to fame was its new motion control system and Wii remote controls. The technology used for the Wii motion control was actually highly innovative, but developers seemed to have a hard time working it into games effectively. Despite this, it was still extremely popular with casual gamers, selling over 100 million units, making it one of the best-selling home consoles ever. 2011, Nintendo 3DS. In the follow-up to the DS, the Nintendo 3DS capitalized on the popularity of 3D at the time. The top screen featured a 3D screen that could be used without special glasses. Opinion on the 3D focus was hit or miss, but no one could deny that the 3DS was one of the most powerful handheld gaming consoles of all time. It featured a huge variety of games, many of which found fun and unique ways to work the 3D features in naturally. The 3DS also had several different versions released in its lifetime, including XL models and 2D models that removed the 3D feature entirely. 2012, Nintendo Wii U. Nintendo's answer to the PS4 and Xbox One, the Wii U was released as the first Nintendo console to feature HD graphics. It also featured a highly polarizing touchscreen gamepad controller that many fans found cumbersome. In fact, the Wii U is likely Nintendo's most polarizing console period. Many fans at the time were baffled at the lack of online features and quality games, and how far behind Nintendo seemed to be compared to Sony and Microsoft. Initial reception of the Wii U was positive, but only sold 13 million units worldwide before production was stopped. The failure of the Wii U would cause Nintendo to take a long look at how they were handling home consoles. 2017, Nintendo Switch. In 2017, Nintendo finally got the formula down right and released their most popular home console yet, the Nintendo Switch. The Switch functions as both a handheld and a home console, a feature that was both revolutionary and well received. Joy-Con controllers were introduced, which were interchangeable and could be slotted into either side of the console for handheld mode or removed when playing on the TV. Switching between handheld and TV display was made seamless due to the Switch dock, which switched over the display automatically when placed or removed. Instead of trying to compete with Sony and Microsoft's hardware, Nintendo instead chose to focus on what they are good at, developing hugely successful party games. This strategy proved to be the right choice, as games like Super Mario Odyssey, Super Smash Bros. Ultimate, and Breath of the Wild would go on to propel the Switch to sell over 125 million units worldwide. And that wraps up this video on the evolution of Nintendo consoles. Let us know down in the comments what your favorite Nintendo console is. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and check back for new videos every week.